Welcome to District 5 of the Kansas Office Club, our meeting today. Welcome to those of you online watching through Zoom and those of you who are in the room present. We are lucky today to have Brian Doldorph as our speaker. Brian is a professor at KU with 9 books of poetry published. He is award-winning poet. He is also the editor of the Coal City Review. He has traveled the world and he has written about it in his poems. And he's also spent 20 years working in the jail, teaching classes to inmates and helping them to discover their own voice. And we're just delighted to have you with us today. Thank you.
Thanks. Just say who you are.
Glad to be here. I'm a retired journalist who moved to Lawrence about 9 years ago. And I got involved with, thanks to the Authors Club, with the writing group at the jail. I was leaving, I was a brand new member, and I was leaving a meeting one time, and one of my friends said, "Oh, I got this friend, Brian Doldorph, and he ran a writing program at the jail, but then he had to stop it to go back to England to deal with the death of his mother. But now he's back and he wants to start it up again." And I just volunteered. I'd be happy to help with that. Next thing I knew, I'm a co-leader of the men's writing group and absolutely loved it. So anyway, I'm glad to be here.
I just wanted to let you all know about this publication, if you don't know already. Coneflower Cafe, published in Kansas, and they're looking for work, and they do really nice publications. Very impressed by the standard of this. It's called Worker. My father was up at 5 every morning. The best time of the day, he'd say. It's when I can think straight. My father was a writer. He wrote advertisements for anyone who'd pay him. Double glazing, sugar, chocolate bars, the Dairy Association, politicians. My father called himself some word that rhymed with door, and when my mother gave him her look, he'd say, pointing at me, "He doesn't understand." His ad writing came later in the day. 5 a.m. was novel writing time, my father's mysterious project that he worked on for years and no one ever saw. The book that was going to give back to my father everything he'd sold. The book that would give him more than he got as that word that rhymed with floor. And then the other one in this publication is called The Last Time I Saw My Father. The last time I saw my father was in Grand Central Station. He was explaining to me how the trains worked. He'd studied it not because he needed to, but out of his own interest. He was like that. My dad loved finding out about things, especially wonderful mechanical things like trains. They were mechanical the last time I saw him. He said it's a miracle of coordination that so many trains enter and leave Grand Central in the way they do. And he began explaining the complexities of scheduling. And just think if there's an error, just think of the consequences of one small error. He'd sketched out some diagrams and charts he was keen to show me, and though I tried to follow his explanations, I couldn't really keep up with him. He even had a slide rule in his pocket and made some calculations, tried to show me what he'd done. It's a marvelous system, like a huge equation that schedulers are solving all the time. My father was leaving for Columbus, where he had what he called business opportunities, which is just about all he said about his various pursuits of the American dream. "This is going to be big," he said, "I'm sure of it. I'll establish myself in Ohio, and then you and your sister can come visit." My shabby, unshaven father hanging out of the train window, holding his felt hat on with one hand, waving with the other, his train leaving right on time. And then this was the book that I published last year. It was a big year for me with publications because the two books that really were important to me, this book and then the book about the Dale, which I'll come to, were both published last year, and both of them were books that I had worked on really for 20 years. The poems in this book, what I did to make this book, and as you all know, you can make books in lots of different ways. But what I did for this book was to read back through all of the poems that I'd written over the last 20 years or so, and I assembled all of my poems that had to do with Kansas in some way, and I, over a long period, I kind of shaped it up into this book. So the poems in this book were written over at least 20 years. And what I did, the way that I organized them, I mean, I was looking for some way to kind of shape all of these different poems. And what I ended up doing was to organize them by the 4 seasons. So the first part of the book is poems about, what did I put? Spring. Yeah, spring was the first section. And so poems about Kansas that had something to do with spring and the new year, that's the first section of the book. And then I went through the 4 seasons, and it was just some way to kind of organize the poems and to give a kind of shape to it. I mean, I'm sure you've all had the experience of, well, I mean, maybe you have, I certainly have. Some books you kind of, I think every book you have to kind of write in its own way. And some books you can kind of start at the beginning and go right through to the end. Or with this book, say, it's more a kind of assembling of what was already written. Magnolia in May, Lawrence, Kansas. What we did in my parents' garden, we should have done for our marriage. Plucked off brown, withering petals of the magnolia, dropped them in a black bucket, so strong new buds could push through. My mother showed us how to do it. We did it in her garden, didn't do it at home, and then it was too late for flowers. The magnolia is one of my favorites because it just has this such a brief time of flowering, and then sometimes it's so beautiful when it flowers, and then sometimes, as you know, it gets caught in the frost, and so we see the flowers sometimes for a few days, and then it's gone again for another year. I'm sure that some of you know about Menninger's in Topeka. Of course, it's moved away now, but Menninger's did such important work in as a psych hospital. I visited the campus there after it was shut down, after Menninger's had moved, and it was really kind of sad to just see what was left of the place. I mean, it was sort of all falling down, and that was my kind of memory of the place. And so I wrote this poem about my experience of visiting the Menninger's campus. It's called Menninger's, Topeka, May 2008. It's closed for business now. So if your mind's walls are cracked, your windows broken, if your foundation's slipping and you need a new roof after the hailstorm, Menninger's can't help you anymore. Boarded up windows, the famous clock stopped, fences up to keep the bums out, the look and reek of decay. You'll have to find some other place for repair. Just like you, Menninger's is falling down. As I say, the poems in this book were written over a long period. But one thing that I noticed in bringing the poems together was that there are a number of poems in the collection about people who have gone missing. And this is just something that has always kind of gotten my attention. And of course, people do go missing, and sometimes they're never located. And so that story comes into these poems in a number of different ways. And I'll read one of the first ones. It's called Missing Husband. It was a cold spring morning, sunny with a clear sky, when Hank left the dishes half done, grabbed his jacket and keys, and drove off in his Ford truck. Didn't take his wallet. Didn't take anything but his truck and himself. Ever since then, and how many years has it been, Mabel has been asked over and over, what was it that made him leave like that? There must have been something. What was it? Women know these things, know if a man's happy or not happy, know if he's got his eye on some other woman, know if another woman's got her eye on him. She can smell it on him. But there was nothing, nothing. That's what Mabel tells them, nothing. Apart from that one thing, but no one else needs to know about that, such a thing's between a husband and wife. You must have heard something, a postcard from Las Vegas or a phone call on Tuesday evening, something. But there was nothing, she insisted, nothing. Apart from that one thing, but she'd torn it up and burnt it. And then from the second section of the book, which is the summer section of the book, this is called Mason City, Kansas. I don't know if there's a Mason City, but I needed to locate the poem somewhere, and that sounded good to me. I mean, the poem is not so much about the place, it's about kind of the mood of the person in the poem. Mason City, Kansas. In the Green Lantern Motel, I light a cigarette, pour wine in a plastic cup, feel better, feel the weight lift from my bones. 3 days ago, I drove out of town, across the Flint Hills, into darkness, then stopped in this small town, Abe's Diner, Quick Shop, and Dollar Store. I needed to be nowhere. At night, I walk by the river, where fireflies weave their magic. Watch the kids at Goose Park. It takes time to get the sadness out. I light another cigarette. And again, this is a fictional town, but this is something that I've seen, and I would guess that all of you have seen this as we drive around in Kansas. The kind of, the decline of the small town, unfortunately, and I think there are quite obvious reasons for that, but it is something that you see so often. This one is called Cooper City. Storefronts boarded up, but Jack's Autos is still there, with rust buckets, non-starters, and Crooked Jack, who left half a leg and most of his soul in Vietnam. Where Zach's gas used to be, there's a Quick Shop. High school kids used to hang out at Zach's, but they're long gone now to that new school in Taylorville. Main Street's a few hand-me-down stores, some sleepy attorneys, and Zeke Haskins' undertaker, with old Zeke in the window, wondering days on end if he or Cooper City will go first. The next poem is called Ex-Footballer, and it was written about a student that I had at KU. I quite often have KU footballers in my classes, and to me, they're kind of like soldiers. It's such a tough thing to do, and I just have many memories of the guys coming into class on Monday, and they're all busted up again from playing, and they sit in the back row, and it's a tough business. Ex-footballer. They say he changed. Now he's moody all the time, spends hours alone in his room, headphones on. He'd always been a happy kid, loved sport, of course. His dad took him to games and told him, don't believe the crap about players getting hurt. This game makes you a man. He played in junior high, hit hard, nothing felt better than that. Played in high school where they called him Suicide because he'd hunt down the biggest guys. Got a scholarship at a JUCO, then recruited by a Big Ten school. missed his junior year through injury. Then in his last season, took a hit that knocked him out. He was never the same after that. What to do without his team? Where to go? Where to go? To Miller's Creek with a gun and be done with it. All done. And then I've got 2 poems about my friend John Musgrave, Vietnam veteran. I think some of you might be aware of John and his work. He was featured in the documentary by Ken Burns that came out about 3 years ago now. And John has just published his autobiography. Well, it's been out for about a year now. And, you know, now he's nationally, internationally known. And I have 2 poems in this book about John. The first one is called Old Soldier. Old soldier hauls himself out to the crossroads where the damn government's building a new road straight through the heart of Indian country. Damn politicians never change. The old soldier knows that. They'll sell you out for a penny, cut your heart out for 10. Old soldier keeps marching in his broken boots. Soon it will be time to march all the way back to that ambush in the bush. Those shots in the chest that should have killed him, did kill him. It's just that he's taking a long time to die. And this poem is called Tug of War. My friend John was so badly wounded in Vietnam that he knew he was dying. He'd seen a lot of guys with chest wounds like his wound, a sucking wound, and none of them survived it. He prayed. He tried to make his peace with God. Then by some miracle, he's still trying to figure out, he did survive it. Spent 18 months in the hellhole of hospital recovering from that wound. When he staggered out of hospital, all he wanted to do was to go back to his war, where he had a gun in his hand and knew who his enemies were, where he knew his buddies would never let him down. No one could say he hadn't done his part, so surely he could go home now. But all he felt was the tug of war. When I write, I'm always trying to sort of get to what's most essential in a story. And I love the world of haiku, and I think it's just such an important skill to learn, you might say, or a way to see the world. And I find with my with the students that I work with, the KU students, for example, there's always the tendency to kind of overwrite, to say too much. And I always like it when I meet a student who thinks about things in the other way and tries to get back to just the kind of key image. And so here's a short poem for you. This is called September Fragment. And so I'm sitting in my front room now, which is my kind of writing room. And this was just I looked up from something I was doing and I just saw this out of the window. And I just really like this image. And I just wanted the poem to be this one image. Oh, September Fragment. 2 small boys in football helmets, blue team jerseys, tight white pants, wander up 13th Street, lost astronauts. I'm going to read just 4 poems from the 4th section of the book, and it's called First Snow. I stayed up late watching snowflakes fall, writing haiku. Then I went to sleep, dreamt of snow covering me in Oak Hill Cemetery like a warm white shroud. In this book, there are a number of poems that tie in with the work that Mike and I have done, which we'll be talking about, where I've taken something from my jail experience, maybe a story or a character or whatever, and started there for writing the poem. And this next poem, it's a short prose poem, you might say, and it's not based on just one story or or one character. It's just bringing together a number of stories that I heard over the years, and that all came together into this one poem, and it's called The Visit, and it's about parents visiting their son in jail. And again, I heard the story from a lot of different people over the years, and I mean, I think I just brought together sort of different aspects of that story into this one poem. So it's called The Visit. Good visit, we say. Fine visit, actually. We'd driven across state to the penitentiary. It looked like an army base as we drove up to it. Razor wire, guard towers, breeze block buildings. It's Sadness City, my wife says. We didn't expect that Anthony would look so good. He's clean, he's gotten pudgy, his face looks fuller, his eyes quite lively. We'd been expecting someplace dirty and dingy. In fact, it's clean and full of light, maybe too much light. We ask Anthony how he's doing, and he says, day at a time, you know, can't do it better than that. That's how everyone says you have to get through time in here. If you start thinking about how many days you have left, you go crazy. Anthony talked about AA and NA meetings, says he's met a counselor, Jackie, he really likes. She says she'll work with me on the outside too. He tells us that his sentencing's on March the 1st, and his attorney thinks he might get 6 years for a first offense, might have to serve 3. Then I'll get out of here and I won't ever come back. It's so boring. Emily doesn't want to know how boring it is. She has other questions to ask, but doesn't know how to ask them. Are you safe? Does anyone try to do anything to you? Anthony says he's been finding out about chef school. That's a profession he could really go for. And there's more of a future in it than there is in crime to support my drug habit. We laugh because we know Anthony wants us to laugh, to show we acknowledge that he's so much on top of things, he can laugh about them. I hear Emily gasp when Anthony, after saying goodbye, turns away. A good visit, we say, a fine visit. Then we hold each other in our cold car, both of us sobbing, shaking as the late afternoon light of a winter's day drains away. And then I'll just read the final poem of the collection. And this was when, after my neighbor here, after she moved away, there was an estate sale, and it just seemed like the right place to end a collection and estate sale. So that became the last poem in the book. Just kind of sort of what's left of your life when you move out or when you move on in some way. Estate sale. All day Saturday, a crowd at my neighbor's house on 13th Street, empty for 5 years. The auctioneer rattles off his call. You know how they do it. I can't do it, but it's $1, $1.50, $1.52. You know, they do that thing. There's not much left of her life. Boxes of junk sold off as lots for a few dollars to traders in bib overalls and baseball caps. 23 chairs, good for firewood, on the sidewalk. Thermometer registering 53 degrees in February sun. Sunday morning bird song and the odd car. Outside her house by 13th Street, the leftovers of her life. Brass floor lamp, split cushions, old books and pictures, wet through from last night's rain. Estate sale. I mean, let's turn to the jail work. So I first heard about it in about the year 2000 or so, because 2 of my colleagues had started a writing program at the jail. Their focus was more on high school degree completion. That's what they wanted to do with the program. And then when I took over the program, in 2001, then I wanted to make it a creative writing program because that's what I do and that's what I thought would be really interesting. And so I started at the jail because there was this program already started, but then when I took over the program, because both of my colleagues left, then I turned it into a creative writing program, and then I stuck with it and went there every week for about 20 years until COVID. And so that's really how I got into it. I think I'm going to hand things over to Mike now to talk about the program, just so that you can hear from Mike, and then I'll come back and say more.
Interesting thing about it, to me, is first of all, the first rule in the class is they can't write about their case. And the second rule is we can't ask them about their case. And so I used to say to them, I don't care what you did or what you're accused of. All I care about is what you're like right now. And I'll tell you, I've done the class with Brian maybe 5 years or so, and every one of these inmates reacted or acted exactly the way you would want your son to act if he was in that situation. One of the most frustrating parts of the class is we never know who's going to be there from 1 week to the next. Because it's a county jail and not a penitentiary, some guys might be found innocent and released. Some might be found guilty and sent to a penitentiary. Some people might make bail. And before COVID hit, the jail was massively overcrowded. So a lot of the guys got what they call farmed out to other penitentiaries. All that. And that was very frustrating to do. One of the highlights, virtually every week, at least one person would write something that just knocked my socks off. There was a guy who came in, I'd say late 20s. He came in and he wrote two things. The first was, I think he was trying to exercise his writing muscle. How many words that rhyme can I put in one poem and have the poem make sense? He had 16 words: consummate, delineate, housemate, and all that. And the poem made sense. Well, then the second thing he wrote is the most lovely love poem I have ever read anywhere. It's called Lonely. If lonely men are allowed to dream and lonely dreams come true, I'll go to bed every night so I can dream of you. And if lonely men are granted wishes, but are only granted two, I'll wish that you will always love me, and I'll give the second wish to you. Holy cow. And we never saw him again. He just came in, wrote those two things, and we've never seen him again. A funny thing about it, a few weeks later, a young man wrote a love poem that wasn't very good. But after class, I said to him, "You want to hear a good love poem?" And I recited it to him, and his eyes got wide. And he said, "Oh, could you write that down for me so I could send it to my girlfriend?" And I'll tell you another enjoyable one. Tony writes this thing, and it starts out, "I love to lick your skin." And we're thinking, uh-oh, where's this going? And Sherry, the program director, she's starting to blush and all that. And he goes on, "Your voluptuous body excites me so." And it's not to the last line that you know who he's talking to. Chicken wings. Oh. And I'll tell you one that just haunts me. And I hope it's fiction, but I think it's a memory. Little boy is sound asleep, curled up against his mother, and they're on a bus at night, and a violent thunderstorm breaks out. Loud thunder, flashing lights, and the little boy wakes up and he's completely disoriented. And he says, "Mommy, Mommy, where are we? Where's Daddy?" And the mother says, "Your daddy told us he don't want us no more, so we're going to live with my mother. Now go back to sleep." God, there's so many. A Native American wrote a piece that was almost a second by second description of what it was like literally be stabbed in the back. And I'm sure Brian or I will read you the scariest poem I have ever read, called Methamphetamine. And what made it even scarier, because the poem describes, what methamphetamine does to you and all that. And it was scary and unpleasant enough as it was. But when we finished reading it aloud, the inmate said, "Yeah, that's exactly what it's like. He hit the nail right on the head." He did? Oh my God. I don't want to be in the same room with meth. Here, I'll read it to you. Methamphetamine. My name is Methamphetamine, but you can call me Speed. I last so much longer than cocaine, and I'm so much better than weed. I've had many names over the years: Crystal, Crank, and Ice. And what I can do to the human brain isn't very nice. I'll make you stay up for days and days and see things that aren't there. I'll turn your wife into a whore and you won't even care. The more you do, the more you want to go faster and faster and faster. Stealing pills for the cook because he's the puppet master. I'll take away everything you love, then laugh at all your pain. I'll make you hear voices, slowly drive you insane. You'll do anything for me, my personal little pawn. You'll be like a walking skeleton. Your teeth will be gone. Don't even try to take me on, because you can never win. But you'll come back, you always do, though you know you're going to lose. Don't try to blame me for your problem. You had the right to choose. You had the right to choose when you die. If you think I care, well, you're sadly mistaken. I'll just add your worthless carcass to the others that I've taken. But it's all good, don't you know? It's all part of my plan. I should come in a baggie that says death for sale, $100 a gram. Sorry about your luck, but you see, I only have one goal. That goal is to ruin your life and slowly take your soul. So hop aboard my crazy train. I know just what you need. My name is Methamphetamine, but you can call me Speed. Holy cow. And all the other inmates in the class said, "That's exactly right. He hit the nail right on the head." It's interesting. I've spoken in Brian's writing classes at KU, and I enjoy the jail class more than the KU class. The KU classes are fine, but the students don't talk to each other. They come in, they're all on their phone, texting away. When the class starts, they put the phone down, we have the class, and they get up and start, walk out without saying a word to each other. Well, the inmates interact with each other all the time, but they don't have cell phones. So they're not addicted to cell phones. So they talk to each other, which I enjoy it, but I'll tell you, like I said about these guys acted the way you would want your son to act. I'll tell you one final story about that. There have been, over the years, maybe a half a dozen times when an inmate is reading aloud what he's written, and he breaks down and cries. And all the inmates are always perfectly respectful of that. But this one guy wrote a letter to his children. And he gets partway through the letter, reading it aloud, and he breaks down and starts crying. I have never heard a human being cry as hard as he did. And an inmate sitting next to me stands up and looks around the classroom and spots where the box of Kleenex was. And he went over and got it and brought it to the guy who was weeping. And when the guy finally stopped crying, another inmate stood up and went over to him and hugged him. Perfect. I wrote a book myself. I'll be happy to come back and talk to you about it sometime. But in the 1970s, I worked at a small college in central Illinois. We caught a student burglarizing a dorm room, kicked him out of school, turned the evidence over to the police. 3 days later, the student was arrested for shoplifting at a local 3 pieces of meat at a local Kroger store. Well, long story short, he murdered 4 witnesses to these 2 cases. I was very involved with the police and testified at the grand jury hearing. I was under death threats. I came away from that, and the college wasn't the same for me after that. The killer was convicted of 2 of the murders, and before he died in prison about 10 years ago, he admitted to the other 2 murders, but their bodies have never been found. Well, anyway, so the college isn't the same for me anymore. So I end up going into journalism, and I wrote a bulk of the thing. It's a memoir. And then I got promoted to editor of this magazine. And that meant a lot more work and travel, and I'm still learning about this new profession. So I put the manuscript aside for about 30 some years. And now we're retired. We moved to Lawrence. I've met Brian, and I had written my manuscript, of course, on a typewriter. Now I got to put it into a computer. And it was so hard immersing myself back into this dark, ugly time. And so I just mentioned to Brian one day, I said, I got to find a college kid who can type this in to the computer for me. And he said, oh, I bet you my daughter Lucy could do it. His daughter was a student in Kansas City at the time. And so I brought Brian the manuscript, and he read it before he gave it to Lucy. Now he's real interested in my story and insists that I tell it to the inmates. So I tell them the story, and now they're real interested in it. And they started nagging me to finish the book. One guy said, Mike, your book is older than I am. All right. I finished the damn book. Well, anyway, so I think I'm finished with it when I get a phone call from one of the police detectives, still looking to find the remains of this one student was murdered, that Smirker said he had murdered.
From the 1970s.
From the 1970s, yeah. And he said there might be a new development in the case. New development? The case is 40 years old. How can there be? And he couldn't tell me what it was. But then the police, dressed in hazmat suits, searched a house that the killer's aunt lived in back in the 70s. But they never found any remains or whatever. But he said, well, we still might have a new development. So I put the manuscript back, thinking I might have another chapter to write. Well, a couple years go by, and I'm thinking, I've had this hanging over my head for decades I better finish this book before it finishes me. And so I did. And I gave a copy of the manuscript to Rhonda Miller, who was president of the statewide Kansas Authors Club one time. And she said to me, after she read it, she said, that little section about the graduation after the murders, I think you should pick that up and move that to the very back, to the very ending of the book. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting idea, but I didn't know, I hadn't decided yet about it. Well, the inmates were so interested in the manuscript that I went to the UPS store and made a copy of it to donate to the jail library. And I happened to have it with me when, I should tell you, the name of the book is And I Cried Too. And that's the last line in this part that Rhonda suggested I move. And one of the inmates asked me, where'd you come up with the title? And I said, oh, I got it right here. And so I read it to him. And the inmates were so moved by it, I thought, oh, Rhonda's right. And so I picked it up, rewrote the opening sentence, and plopped it at the very end of the book. Well, I never dreamed that I would use a jail writing class as a focus group for my own work. Well, anyway, I submitted the manuscript to Meadowbrook Press in Emporia, and they published it. I highly recommend them, by the way. And so my book came out in 2019 stuff. And 2 weeks after the book was published, so I finally have it. 2 weeks later, my wife is diagnosed with cancer of the esophagus. And that kind of, my urge to write was like a balloon that got punctured by the diagnosis. She died a little over a year ago. So I really need to get back to writing.
Yeah, it's been so good to work with Mike at the jail. We started, I was doing the class from 2001, but Mike was a big part of it after about 2015. So we worked together for about 5 or 6 years in the class, and it was great. I'd like to share my screen with you now and just show you a few things about the book by just sharing with you some of the voices that we heard over the years. So you don't know where these lines come from. They're, I remember them all very vividly, but I think you'll find that they're very kind of haunting and memorable, and they kind of bring you into experience that. I'll just read these few quotations to begin with, and these were some of the things that were written in the class. When you arrive, read the sign. Leave all hopes and dreams behind. Forget all you have or had in the free world. It no longer matters. It will only distract you, and you'll become prey to the lions in this jungle. Trust no one. Everyone is out for something in this cutthroat society. I write because it unclutters my mind, purges the negativity, and replenishes peace while holding my demons at bay. One of the guys in class wrote that, and when he read it, I thought, that is the truth. That is why we do it. After so long in here, and so many hours upon days upon weeks locked in a cell, the more claustrophobic I've become. It's a mental challenge every time I step through that door and they think that I'm trying to be defiant. I watch as time slowly chews away on men's sanity, where confusion reigns supreme. Soon now the jail awakens to do its time. It seems better at that than we. I think it's because the cold walls got timed down because they know they will never be free. I fail at most everything until my pen unwinds. Words unveil through mists of time in my mind. I may not shine or even get what's mine, But when these words come together, they're one of a kind, my little mark in the world. I'm so different from you. Well, I've been down, don't get me wrong, trying to turn a beautiful disaster into a beautiful song. I'm so different from you. Dreams and prayers fill my heart, giving me hope so I don't tear apart. I'm so different from you. How does this writing relate to someone who hasn't been incarcerated, doesn't know anyone who has been inside the walls? So, what makes this writing significant, interesting to somebody who hasn't been through this experience? And I like to use this quotation from Sister Helen Prejean, who I'm sure most all of you will know, with all of the work that she's done with incarcerated people. And this is what she writes in the foreword to a book about prison writing. Helen writes, "When I read anything, I'm always hoping the writer will take me into realms of experience I wouldn't otherwise have, experiences that push the edges of human life and our ways of doing things, put me up against myself and make me ask, what would I do in this situation? Who would I become?" Adventure stories are like that. Prison writings are like that. Come with me, these convict writers say. I'll take you into my world. Hang on, it's quite a ride. So I think she's saying that, with any kind of art at all, what the artist is trying to do, writer, painter, whatever, filmmaker, is try to bring you into the experience that they're depicting. And she argues, and I would agree with her from my own experience, that a lot of the writing that we dealt with over the years brought us into the experience, and it was quite a ride, as she said. I'd just like to set the work that we did in the kind of broader context of the US criminal justice system, which is a huge thing, as you all know, costs a huge amount of money. One of, I think, the highest incarceration rate by population in the world. It's a massive system, and the jail where we taught was just one small part of all of this. Douglas County Jail in Lawrence, Kansas is one of over 3,000 jails and almost 2,000 state and federal prisons that make up the huge American correction system. That is a lot of institutions, a lot of money invested in this system, and most people think that it doesn't work very well for a lot of different reasons, but it doesn't seem to be doing what we would like it to do. Estimates vary on the number of inmates in US jails and prisons, but most estimates are about 2+ million inmates. And then this population rose after the 1980s, especially with so-called war on drugs, war on crime and war on drugs. And that, for the most part, impacted minority communities, and the prison population in the US expanded rapidly, and now is approximately 2 million. And then one of the main influences for writing this book and for the work that I did in the correction system was Jimmy Santiago Baca, who is just one of the best known American writers now, especially as far as issues of incarceration are concerned. And this is what he wrote about the system. "We are all connected to a national madness that absurdly expects prisoners to change for the better as we deep freeze them in 6x9 cells. We seek to reduce crime while we do everything in our power to create it." Baca then argues for the worth of inmate writing programs that can bring about substantial changes for the better, as happened in his own situation. He says that through the redemptive act of writing, inmate writers announce to the world beyond the walls and bars that a spark of life still burns in them. Through writing, they might become meaningful human beings in a society that had branded them as nothing more than worthless criminals. And Baca himself is a perfect example of this. He was incarcerated when he was young, 19 or 20, served a lot of prison time, taught himself how to write, and then when he did get out, he became, really one of the best known writers in contemporary American literature. And then there's a lot of research about the benefits of education behind the walls, and most all of the research shows that for a relatively small investment, very important changes can be made, and they are changes in people's lives that are, extremely beneficial not only to them but to keeping people out of this system. I'm quoting from this big survey. Prison inmates who receive general education and vocational training are significantly less likely to return to prison after release and are more likely to find employment than peers who do not receive such opportunities. 43% less likely to return to prison. So what Mike and I were doing was just one tiny little part of this whole idea of, using time behind the walls as an educational opportunity. So the book is mainly focused on the class and the characters in the class and the writing that was done in the class, but I also tried to put it within the context of the whole system and to show that it was, part of something much bigger than itself. And so I drew on these writers, Patrick Alexander, and Lamberton, Eldridge Cleaver. Eldridge Cleaver, a Black writer incarcerated in the 1960s, very tough prison experience. And this is a quotation from his book, Soul on Ice. I realized that no one could save me but myself. The prison authorities were both uninterested and unable to help me. I had to seek out the truth and unravel the snarled web of my motivations. I had to find out who I am and what I want to be, what type of man I should be, and what I could do to become the best of which I was capable. And so Cleaver, like others, like some of the guys that Mike and I worked with, they, were able to really turn their lives around through their writing, and, we were a part of that through the class. And then I'd like to read 3 poems from the class that all stood out for me, and I wrote about all of these 3 poems in my book because they seem to be poems that said something very well about themes that often came up in the class. Of course, a lot of the guys wrote about addiction. It's just a huge part of the reasons why people end up behind the walls. I mean, it's just so much a part of all of that. And this, I think, was one of the most memorable poems about addiction and what it means to the guys who are dealing with it and end up in jail or prison. Addiction. I'm writing this about sickness, or maybe it's a disease better known as an addiction. It causes a chain of events that lead to a definite end. Of freedom, of life, of happiness, loss in general, friends, family, possessions, you name it. The first to go is your looks, or is it your sanity? Maybe it's your wealth. It's hard to say. It all happens so fast. Does it really matter the order in which one falls apart? It's not like it's an art, the way we tear ourselves apart. Where do I start? First, I'd say we start forgetting to eat, to wash our feet. Then as time starts to pass, we forget to wash our ass. Next, you'll be lying on the floor, wishing you had some more, refusing to answer the door. Then you're out in the street, wishing you had something to eat. And this affliction, I realize, is an addiction, has caused a disease I'm starting to know. It's a sickness. I hope I die with quickness. And then Mike and I were very close to one of the guys that we worked with over the years, who, when he was released, came back to the jail as an instructor in the class, Antonio, and he was a big part of my book. And I also helped him get his own book published, really one of the best writers that I dealt with, and somebody who was doing really good work to help other people. We lost him last year. He had a lot of health problems and he died when he was 44, but he is just a huge part of everything that we were trying to do with this program. And this is one of his poems that means so much to me and to other people too. A Poet's Heart. Lines composed on writing paper, comprised of words scribbled on various pieces of paper. Scrap paper, court papers, jailhouse request forms, receipts, even napkins depict the legacy of this wounded heart that despite its constant anguish, still pumps life. A heart that beats to the rhythm of Mother Earth's drums. A heart that flashes like lightning across the darkest skies. A heart that burns with desire and does not extinguish in the hardest of rain or strongest of winds. A heart with the insatiable hunger of this starving artist. A heart that was once frozen, that now flows like streams into rivers, into oceans, into the sea of life. This heart is the heart of the poet. And then this was written by Shane, as was the first poem that I read in this section. And Shane, I mean, he was one of the best writers at just catching what this experience was and making it very vivid for those of us kind of on the outside who probably will never be in this situation. But he just made us really feel it. And, you know, Mike was talking about the way that at the jail, there was a big turnover in population. You were never quite sure who would be in there week by week. And I think this poem kind of speaks to that, the way that the system kind of brings people in and turns them out and brings them back in, and it goes on like this. The replacements. The replacements come in, first one, then another. Some wear the uniform as I do, some wear the other. Some walk in and the door slams shut. Some stay quiet, others kick and scream. Some post bail and for a time are let out of jail. Others stay where they lay. And if you were to ask, they'd probably tell you, this is the life I chose. But did I choose it or did it choose me? I'm not saying this was my destiny or even my fortune, or maybe it was my fate. Not that it was meant to be, but this was the hand I was dealt, and I could either watch where I lay or let the streets carry me away. So I ran from one to the next with a pocket full of need and a heart full of greed. It wasn't long, I was caught in a trap, and there was no turning back. Every time I tried to walk away, the streets, they called me back. The creative faucet is still on, and we are dripping wet in poetry. The last line of this poem I used as the title for the final chapter in the book, because I thought that it just showed that even in the kind of worst of circumstances, some of the guys realized that one thing that they could do to help their situation was to write, to create art. And I just love this image of the creative faucet is still on and we are all dripping wet in poetry. And then I just wanted to read one more poem. This was a poem that Mike mentioned. This was written by a guy who I'd seen in the class a number of times. Quite a lot of the guys would come into class and then they'd go away again and then they'd come back. And so I saw this guy on a number of occasions, but I didn't really know him very well. But this poem really stands out to me. And people who have read the book, they quite often talk about this particular poem, that it stands out amongst everything else that was written and I included in the book. So it doesn't have a title, but you'll soon pick up on what it's about. I recently got stabbed in the back, literally in my back, in between some ribs and into my lung. The burn they say you feel is very real, but the worst was trying to breathe. It's like inhaling sand and glass. Not too terrible, but still pretty bad. I thought I was going to die, And actually the nurse at the hospital said I was lucky to be alive. A few more hours and I wouldn't be here. So I feel like a change in my lifestyle is necessary. It takes some experience like that to make me open my eyes. That's all bad, but I'm taking the right steps: rehab, spirituality, and a better connection with friends and family. Today, like every day, I thank the Lord for being with me when I needed him the most. I mean, it would have been spirit or whatever you want to think. I guess for the sake of wanting something to believe in, a purpose other than getting high awaits me. Words is a powerful thing, and I'm very pleased to say that it won a notable book award. So I'm very proud of that, not only for myself, but for all of the people that were included in the book. My purpose in writing it was just to try to have a place where I could save what we had done in the class, some of the most important things that had happened, some of the lives that were involved in this class, both the instructors and the inmates, and just what we were able to achieve over the 20 years or so of the class. When I was doing it, I never thought it would end. I mean, I was quite determined to keep going, just as long as it was possible. But then COVID comes along and it upturns all of our lives, and that's what killed off our program. That's what it was. For me, it was 20 years of experience, the best teaching experience that I've had, and I've done a lot of different things in education here and in other places. But as Mike was saying earlier, this was the most important thing. Yeah, the most important thing that I've done in education. And I think that it gave me the opportunity to reach people and to, hear from them in the most significant way that I've experienced. So I'm going to stop talking now, and maybe Mike has some other things to say.
The fella Antonio that he talked about was a real gangbanger as a teenager, ended up serving a 10-year prison sentence, gets out, keeps doing the same stuff, gets sent back to prison. And at some point, he realized if he didn't change his ways, he was going to die in prison or get shot on the street. So he signed up for every workshop that they had. And he discovered one of them was a writing workshop. And he discovered his passion and his talent and wrote like crazy. He's the only ex-con who's ever been allowed back in the jail as a volunteer. And, the inmates all paid attention when Brian or I talked, but they really paid attention when Antonio talked. So it was a great loss for us. One other thing I wanted to mention, after I had done it at the class a couple of times, Brian and I are walking out, and in the lobby, we get talking to these two guys who were coming in, and they said that they did a seminar on how to be a good father. I don't know, and it kind of puzzled me. Well, after I'd been doing this quite a while, I realized a lot of the inmates write about their mother or to their mother. Nobody wrote about their father. I think because the father wasn't there. And maybe one reason why these guys are incarcerated now is because they didn't have a positive role model. Yeah, Brian and I, if they would ever reinstate it again, Brian and I would be back there in a heartbeat.
We would, yeah.
So
when I first started the class back in 2001, I thought that I was going to do it like a creative writing class, which was what I was used to teaching, in college and elsewhere. So we would do a kind of workshop and we would critique each other's poems. That didn't work out in the class especially because the population was changing from week to week. So that wouldn't really work. And so what the class quickly became was more like a kind of forum for presenting your work. And so we gave as many people as possible the opportunity to present their work to the class and, get sort of immediate feedback on it. But we didn't do the kind of, workshop critiquing, which is the way that workshops like this often work. What we did in the class, and again, I described this in the book because I thought it would be useful for other people who were trying to do something like this. We divided the class into 3 parts. The first part of the class, we read through what we'd written in the class the previous week. I typed up everything from the class from the previous week, so it would often be, as many as, say, 20 poems, and I would hand out the packets of poems to the guys in class. And the first thing we would do was to read through what we had done last week. And the guys were really proud that, it felt like they'd had a poem published because I had typed up their poem from the previous week. That was the first part of the class. In the second part of the class, we did some free writing in class, because when I do creative writing classes, I always like to spend some time writing in class so that we actually produce something in class. So we did some writing in the second part of the class. And then in the third part of the class, we read what we had written in the class that day. And also some of the guys would bring in poems that they'd written during the week and they'd read them to the class. And then at the end of the class, we would collect all of the work from that week. And I would do my regular chore of typing up the poems for next week. And so we just kept the class going week after week like that. And then one thing that we always did in class, and don't even remember why we started doing this, but I write about it in the book, is that at the end of class, we always listened to and watched the video of Johnny Cash singing Hurt. I'm sure that all of you know that song Hurt, that Johnny Cash released shortly before his death in 2003. And it's a poem that spoke to a lot of the guys in the class who were trying to deal with their own lives. And,
it was about regret.
Yeah. And trying to deal with their lives. So that was what the class looked like. Mike, do you want to add to that?
A lot of what Brian talked about, the cost of the incarceration and the number of people involved. I saw some examples. First of all, there were a couple of inmates that I think have emotional or mental problems, which may be what got them there. But are they getting any kind of mental help, any counseling, or are they just in the jail? And another guy said to me he was going to be getting out of jail shortly, but he was going to be on probation. And so he had to stick in the Lawrence area because that's where his probation officer was. And he said, what I really want to do, my older brother moved to South Dakota, and I would really like to join him there where nobody knows me. Nobody knows my reputation. But I have to stay here in Lawrence, which means I'll end up running around with the same group of guys that got me in jail in the first place. So there are so many little things about the program, and there were cases too of during the COVID thing when things are getting shut down. Antonio told me about, if they had to do a Zoom thing, for a court proceeding or something. A lot of those guys had no idea how to do that. And of course, if they miss it, then probation will probably be, taken away and all that. And so Antonio did a lot of counseling and work with these guys, even after we weren't doing the class anymore. I noticed a lot of times the guys, especially the first timers, they're kind of new, you know, and they're kind of nervous about this. They don't know what this is going to be like, and, you know, exposing my inner thoughts to a group and all that. So if I could think of something funny to write, I would do it, with the idea that if I can get them to laugh or chuckle or at least smile, then maybe that would relax them some. And so I wrote this piece in the movie, The History of the World. Mel Brooks plays Moses, and he comes down, after talking to God, he comes down the mountain with 3 stone tablets under his arm. And then he says to the assembled multitude, God has given me the 15th, and one of the tablets slips out from under his arm and smashes into dust. And he looks back up at the crowd and says, God has given me the 10 commandments. And so here's the question. What were those other 5 commandments? This is not a frivolous question. You don't want to be condemned to hell because you violated the 12th commandment. And there's one guy who wrote, the 12th commandment is, thou shalt not own a cat. And it turns out he did own a cat and had very grudging admiration for the cat. One line was, she doesn't care what commandments I break as long as I feed her on time. And he ended by saying, so if you want to get a cat, get a cat. Just don't expect her to prop up your fragile ego. I wrote one that said, you Kansas City sports fans are a bunch of wimps. And they all looked at me kind of askance. Their inmates aren't used to being called wimps. You know, so the Royals win the World Series. And all this whining starts. Oh, it's been 35 long years. Then the Chiefs win the Super Bowl and the whining starts up again. Oh, it's been 50 long years. Well, excuse me. I'm a Chicago baseball fan. It took my White Sox 80 years to win the World Series. It took the Cubs 108 years to win it. And you guys are whining about 35 and 50. Give me a break. And they all, well, yeah, I guess so.
Thank you so much, Brian and Mike.